Exodus 1:11 says that the Israelites built the storage cities of Ramses and Pithom. Many people talk about Ramses, with it being the imperial capital, but little is said about Pithom. Today, we talk about Pithom on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. As an archaeological site, Pithom doesn't get a lot of attention, but it is a very important site. Pithom is located in the center of the Wadi Tumilat and was the capital of the Cheku province. Skeptics used to claim that the archaeology of Pithom was proof of a first millennium composition of the Bible. John Van Cedar said that the Pithom stela proved that Tel El Maskuda was the site of Pithom, and that the site dates to no earlier than the 7th century BC. The Wadi Tumilat project, directed by Jack Holliday of the University of Toronto, confirmed these results. Holliday asserted that because of the findings at Tel El Maskuda, the mention of Pithom in Exodus 1:11 was, quote, anachronistic, quote. Therefore, the place names for the route of the Exodus are a better fit for the 6th century context. However, these claims are ultimately built upon an absence of evidence argument. As noted by Hofmeyr and Rensburg, quote, the problem with historical reconstructions based on the absence of archaeological data is that when new discoveries are made, old theories can collapse in an instant, end quote. The earliest mention of Pithom appears in the papyrus Anastasi 4, lines 54 to 57, in reference to a Ketem fortress of Merneptah. Now, this text dates to Dynasty 19. The attaching of Pithom to a significant defensive structure should by itself be regarded as significant. Furthermore, a highly decorated 19th dynasty tomb was found at Tel El Maskuda of the official Ken Amun, whose wife Isis was a singer of Atum, suggesting that a temple of Atum, the creation deity, was nearby. This throws into doubt the conclusions of Van Cedar's, but also Holliday's, since an elaborately decorated tomb of a high official requires an infrastructure of qualified craftsmen to properly execute such mortuary plans. So how is it possible that Holliday missed such an important find on the site of Tel El Maskuda? The reason seems to be because he limited his dig to the 26th dynasty enclosure without exploring beyond those limits. So it seems that Tel El Maskuda may not actually be the original Pithom. Edward Naville had discovered that Tel El Rutaba had not only New Kingdom remains of defensive fortifications, but also the remains of a temple to Atum that dated to Ramses II and Ramses III. Petrie found a dyad of Ramses II and Atum along with temple blocks smiting foreigners as, quote, Atum, Lord of Cheku, which explains the basis for the name Pithom, House of Atum. Overall, it is clear that Pithom had the Ketem fortress expected from Papyrus Anastasi 4, a temple Atum which is essential to the name Per Atum, and it is contemporaneous with the 19th dynasty, as expected from the late Egyptian miscellanies and the Book of Exodus. So what appears to have happened is that the capital of Cheku was at Tel El Rutaba, was renamed to Pithom in the 13th century when Ramses II built a Ketem fortress and a temple of Atum, Then the capital was relocated to Tel el Mascuda in the 6th century, but only after Tel el Retaba was abandoned in the 7th and 6th centuries BC. Unfortunately, some dubious YouTube skeptics are still using the name Pithom as an ejection to a historic exodus because they didn't get the memo. But skeptics aren't the only people to critique the archaeology of Pithom. Advocates of the early Exodid state have also been critical since the toponym Pithom dates securely to the 13th century BC, not the 15th century BC. While being completely oblivious to the fact that his criticism tacitly agrees with liberal notions of redaction criticism, Titus Kennedy recently stated in an interview with Sean McDowell that unpublished research has shown that Pithom was abandoned during the reign of Amenhotep II, and this is proof of the early Exodus date. But there are problems with this. The Wadi Tumilat was first occupied by Semitic migrants during the First Intermediate Period, and Pithom had a healthy population until the site was abandoned in the 16th century BC. Yet, the site was not completely abandoned at this time. Instead, the Egyptians turned the site into an Egyptian town that thrived until the time of Thutmose III and Hatshepsut. After this, only a token population lived at Pithom until Ramses II rebuilt Pithom with a Ketem fortress and a temple. It must be stressed that the late 18th dynasty abandonment of the city represented the Egyptian population leaving, not a Semitic population. And as such, this abandonment is not relevant to the Exodus. So while Kennedy is correct that the site was fallow during the reign of Amenhotep II, that was because the Semitic peoples at Pithom had left the site on or prior to the reign of Amenhotep I. Essentially, the abandonment Titus Kennedy is talking about occurred 150 to 200 years prior to the early Exodus date, and would not be repopulated with Semites until the beginning of Dynasty 19. Second, the Bible does not mention that Pithom was abandoned. While it might be corroborating evidence, it cannot be proof, since the Bible only claims that the Israelites built the storage city of Pithom and camped there. The text says nothing about the site being abandoned. While the Wadi Tumilat was the entry and exit corridor for Semites coming in and out of Egypt, and may have picked up other Semites that pastured flocks in the Wadi Tumilat, the Bible and archaeology are silent when it comes to whether a local Semitic population left Pithom during 1446 BC. In short, Kennedy's assertion is empty conjecture. However, more problematic is that if what Titus Kennedy says is true, it implies that the site, named Cheku during the 15th century, was renamed Pithom not just by Ramses II in the 13th century, but that redactors had changed the Bible after the death of Moses in at least a dozen different instances. This is a major problem with the early Exodus date. They are forced to claim that the toponyms in the Exodus itinerary were updated by later redaction to accommodate the challenges of modern archaeology.
What happened was the name that Moses would have written in his original manuscript almost certainly would have been a transliteration of Peru Nefer, pleasant journey. But since that went out of vogue centuries later, after Moses wrote, and he would have written by 1406 BC, centuries later, it's the period of the judges or early in the monarchy, the scribes are looking at this information that's in the Pentateuch and Genesis 47 and Exodus 1, and they're saying, okay, maybe a couple of us old guys understand this word that was used here, but that's not what it's called nowadays. Nowadays, it's called paramesy. So let's update the text. Not let's corrupt the text. Let's update the text and give the new name of the city as it is today, so that the readers are going to understand when they read this where it is that the Israelites were located.
But this raises an interesting question. If redactors went in and changed the place names in the book of Exodus, what else did redactors change? Early Exodus date apologists saved the literal reading of 1 Kings 6:1, but by doing so, they destroy the integrity of the rest of Scripture. In conclusion, the dating and archaeology of Pithom is entirely consistent with the late Exodus date, the archaeology, the Egyptian texts, and the Ramesside context found in the book of Exodus. Anyway, I hope you found this video interesting. I hope you learned something today. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.